year.
Tom Savage of Three Red Kings. Tom, unfortunately, we seem to be back here Groundhog Day in the same place that we've been in the last few years. And notice I didn't talk to you after the Leinster game because, to be honest with you, I was kind of just too annoyed, and I didn't want to be having the same postmortem that we were having kind of this time last year and the year before and the year before and the year before, or back in January. So we said we'd give that a break in the hope that we'd be coming back here to discuss the extension of our European season or of our season, somewhat, but that hasn't happened either. Look, very, very hard to argue with the result at the weekend. I think 7 points probably flattered us a small bit, in that I just think Toulouse were better than they were better than 7 points better than us, if you know what I mean, on the greater scheme of things. I think at halftime 16-9, if I'm correct. But you just felt that this Toulouse side had gears when they needed them, and we just didn't. Great effort, valiant. It's valiant in defeat sounds patronizing. We're not being patronizing here, but just coming up short. We came up short against the Pro 14 team the week before in Leinster. I'd put it to Toulouse are probably a step up in physicality from Leinster again. And look, not found wanting for effort, but just found wanting for that brute force and that physicality that we're going to have to develop from somewhere if we want to start being in the business ends of competitions. And it is a bit disheartening when you look at a team like Munster when, semi-finals were considered to be a bad season for Munster. If we didn't make semi-finals, then it kind of went back to, making quarterfinals and home quarterfinals. And now it's slowly our expectations of our European seasons have regressed. I know other teams have improved, but not great. Tom, what's your take on it now that we've had a bit of time to digest it?
Well, I think Munster's problem has been semi-final tier teams. The teams like Leinster, like Toulouse, who I think will make a final this year. Teams like Exeter, Racing, Saracens at their best. Were always a kind of a stopping point for Munster over the last number of years. I suppose it comes down to, because I've watched this game back and I've watched the Leinster game back a lot because I'm a masochist really at heart. I've watched these games a few times, and the one thing that comes away every single time out of both games is that Munster need more size and power. If we don't have that size and power over the full 80, because we've got good players. I genuinely think that we do. I think we've got a good team. But up to a certain point, the very highest levels of this game in Europe, against your Toulouses, against your Leinsters, that's what they are. You have to have that power equivalence over the course of 80 minutes. If you don't have it, you've got to have a scheme to play around it. Play more complex rugby. That in itself, in knockout rugby, and when the physicality is very high, becomes difficult. And you still have to win collisions. I think Munster over the last number of years have tried to work our way around this size disadvantage that we come up against Leinster, Racing, Saracens, Toulouse in this instance, with a kicking game. I think when you see a lot of the criticism that Munster have taken over the years for the kicking game, I think that the kicking game is a realistic way to get Munster to compete when we don't have full 80-minute capacity to handle the power of a team like Toulouse. You look at some of the guys who Toulouse started and brought off the bench. Look at their front five. Look at the size and power of the guy there. Look at Joe Corey and Flemont coming off the bench. Castettes, Aldergeri. You have what's it called? Movaca. They're hooker, big, powerful players, and that counts at the high end of European rugby. Even against Leinster last week. Porter, Furlong, Kelleher, Healy, And then you've got the size then of Toner and the experience of Faraday. But that front four, both starting and off the bench, really adds a lot and makes it very difficult for Munster to compete. So we kick to get around that aspect of it. And you can talk about offloading. And a lot of people have spoken about, oh, should Munster be offloading more? Look, you've got to win collisions somewhere. And if you're offloading, into what space? You must have a system in place to do it. But if you're losing collisions, you're always going to be playing a puncher's chance in a game against the very biggest and the very best sides. You look at the way Toulouse worked this game in the second half once they started turning on the power. Remember, they transitioned to their bench very early, from around 45 minutes to 50.
Yeah, it seemed to be in the like barely, the guys had barely gotten out and scored that first try after the restart, and it was already in the process of changing it up. You know, they just seemed to have resources off the bench that we just wouldn't dream of having.
Yeah,
that can kill you in that. And you know, it was almost like as soon as those changes were made, give it 20 minutes until they really have an effect. Give it 20 minutes until that physicality starts to match up against guys who've been on for 60. And then you've got guys who've 60 minutes under their belt versus guys who've got 20 and who are, you know, just beginning to get to the pitch of the game. And that's what you've seen from a French team who've had the luxury of having those kind of players, who've had the luxury of bringing those guys on, and who can basically play a waiting game. They can wait for the last 20 minutes, and that's what they did. They struck, and when they did, it was clinical and it was powerful.
Yeah, and I think people look at the highlights, right? They look at Cheslin Colby maybe throwing an offload, or they maybe look at Roman Antimac throwing a big long pass, or that, you know, sidestep from Lebel on Hanrahan, which, to be fair, he will look back and think he could have done better on that. But all that was created by forward pressure, incremental gains up the middle of the field, 1 meter, 2 meters, collisions won. Munster players, you know, with two guys taken off their feet by a carry and another guy bound to the floor. On the other hand, Munster not being able to impact regularly and consistency. Like, we were able to do this at certain points during the game where we were backed our kicking game, kicked to Toulouse. They claimed the ball. When we made contact in transition, we were able to attack that breakdown, steal the ball. Happened 2 or 3 times, and we scored off one of them. So you look at those moments and go, look, that's how Munster had to approach this game. And that's how we've had to approach games like these against a team like Toulouse. Like, you look at if, say, Gloucester had rolled up at Thomond Park on Saturday with the luck of the draw, for example, right? I think Munster beat them. You look at a lot of the other teams there outside of maybe Exeter, maybe Leinster, Toulouse, and, you know, Racing, and I think that we probably beat most of them, which is probably that has been our level for the last number of years. Like, you look at last year, we had Racing and Saracens in the same pool. We've tended to lose to those teams, and so we did. Like, and that's what I think is the issue, and it has been the issue for Munster over the last number of years, that power differential. And the guy we signed this year to make a huge difference for us, RG Sneeman, has played 7 minutes of rugby all season long, and like, it's not just about one player, because I think even with RG Sneeman in there, I'm not sure we fully get over the line this season, but he certainly helps, and I think he certainly makes it a lot closer. And a guy like him, it's not just about one player, or even the players that are there. It's about the collective power output that these guys have and your ability to compete over the course of 80 minutes. Again, like, it's just, like, when I watched this game back from around 45, 50 minutes on, you could see Munster slowly, they were starting to drain away at the Munster resistance and the Munster defensive like impact that we were making phase for phase. It adds up. And
it was like playing Street Fighter when you see your energy bar going down, and you know that if you just take one more hit here, that you're done for.
That's it. Like,
that's what I kind of put it on a level with it. You're just going, oh, look, we're fragile here. We can't take too many more body blows.
And that's it. And kind of like a lot of the commentary that I've seen about it looks at like, oh, where's Larkham's attacking stuff? Where's all this? Look, I think you saw evidence of Stephen Larkham's influence during the tries that we did score, and how Munster worked their way into those positions.
Yeah, and look, I'd put it to you that, you know, you can't crib about what they tried to do in an attacking sense this week. You can't crib that they didn't have a cut this week. I think that what stung the most about the week before was the fact that we didn't fire a shot.
Yeah.
This week we fired plenty shots. We were just outgunned. I think that was, if you want to be very simple about it. But I think the main gripe at Munster fans last week is that we just looked like we didn't fire a shot against Leinster. And, I put it to you that, whatever about not firing a shot against Toulouse, but to do it against the bitterest of rivals up the road, that stings a bit more. I mean, you'd rather that we had a physical clip off of Leinster. We didn't. Can't change that now, but at least if you are looking for some positives, the shackles seemed to come off yesterday in this side, and they just went out. Now, in fairness, Toulouse probably went out with a different mindset to Leinster in that they didn't really look too bothered about shipping tries because they seem to have the confidence in their own attacking game that regardless, it was kind of like you score 4, we'll score 5 kind of thing. They just seem to have that air of confidence. I think Leinster's game plan was very much the week before was to grind Munster into submission. It was a 10-point hammering is probably a bit unfair, but you know what I mean? Leinster were better than 10 points ahead of Munster last week.
Oh, they were. And look, I think you look at this game and I think you look at like last week against Leinster. Our kicking game didn't function last week. It just didn't. And when it doesn't function, we aren't able to compete like for as long. Against Toulouse, our kicking game I think actually worked quite well, and that gave Munster access. Like one of the biggest things I get about this game is if you just look at the trends of the game over the last number of years, you look at the way that the Springboks were trying to play. Prior to Rassie Erasmus going back there, what were they trying to do? Trying to play with a lot of expansive rugby and really expand the scope of their attacking game. What pushed them towards the World Cup? Going with 6-2 splits, kicking almost every ball that they won in their own half, and beating teams up phase for phase. Like old school Springbok rugby, that won them a World Cup from like 2 years out when, to be fair, the likes of Scotland and other teams like that were looking at them and going, here, we've got a great chance of taking the Springboks this week. Like that changed up. They changed up how they approached the game, and it brought instant rewards. They were able to use a little bit of expansivity when it allowed, but that shows that like the route for winning this game, and like a lot of teams are talking about, like they need to expand. Munster need to expand their game. Show me a team in World Rugby right now who is winning trophies that does not have a game that is based around forward domination from the start and off the bench. There are none. Look at Exeter last year. They are a game that is like, they run with a system in their pack where they've got a really heavy front 5, and they almost have they've almost got 4 second rows in the field. When you look at the way that they operate with their second rows and their flankers, Sam Simmons is a kind of a wing forward type guy that they play at 8. That's the way their system runs. But they've got huge size and huge power. Saracens dominated Europe for years. How do they do it? Massive size, massive power from the start and off the bench. So I think a lot of the stuff about expanding Munster's attacking play, which I think certainly they have done, until Munster have the power to live with these teams over the course of a full 80 minutes, to a certain extent, we will continue to have these conversations after a season where you just come short. And like you might throw in the Thomond Park factor. A full Thomond Park on Saturday, maybe Munster get over the line.
Yeah, maybe it gets you a couple of more decisions than you would have otherwise got. But in fairness, the penalty count was, I think, 11-10 against us. So it's not like we were whistled off the pitch.
Oh no, it's nothing to do with Wayne Barnes. But it's just those decisions you get a decision here or there, and it might push you over the like against Toulon, who had us for size, but the Thomond Park factor played a part. Bit of magic from Andrew Conway, saw out the game at the end. One of those days. This is one of those days where the size and power advantage, we were not able to overcome it. I think Billy Holland said it himself in the interview with Munster Rugby after the game, where he was just like, where sometimes Thomond Park, it can make you play beyond yourself. That's a factor I think that we kind of underestimate at times in big games like this, where the crowd really do drive people on and influence the referee as well. That's, let's be honest, that's also a factor. But look, it's not something, look, everybody's playing that way at the moment. There's no crowds anywhere. So look, it's just one of those things where I think when people look for it, the instant decision is, or the instant reaction is, change the coach. Change the coach. For me, changing the coach now, all that does is it changes the accent of the fella coming out saying after the season why we haven't won another trophy. Until Munster have the power in the front five, both starting and off the bench, to compete with the top teams in Europe, we will always be having these conversations. You might get lucky with a game here or there, but we're
not going to win trophies. We might win it. We might spring somebody in a quarterfinal and get to a semi-final, and we'll be having be having the exact same conversation. Yeah, and you see some.
Go ahead.
You see some of the commentary over the weekend about Ronan O'Gara and coming into Munster and all this sort of stuff. And I think we had you made a very, very good point off air to me last night, is that, like, why would he? You're considering the constraints that are on the Irish system and on coaches coming into the Irish system, where they can't sign who they want. Everything has to be done within budget. And I'm not having a pop at that, but that system is what it is. It's a system that's heavily leaned towards one province, which is not Leinster's fault. That's just geography and numbers. You're pretty much on a hiding to nothing. I mean, look at Johan van Graan. What options does he can't go out and sign an entire new front row this year to solve that problem. If he could solve it, and he could solve it in a transfer window, or he could solve it in an off season, but he doesn't. And I think sometimes he's the first person that we look to blame because we haven't won a trophy. And it's the easiest thing in the world to say is that we haven't won a trophy, because you can stand over it and say we haven't. Have we improved? Yes. Have we closed the gap? That's arguable, because the gap that we've been trying to close, it's not like those teams are standing still. They're still getting better. Mm-hmm. It's just at what rate? I mean,
like you look at some of the best, one of the best players developed by Leinster, who I think will be a huge player for them this season, Ronan Kelleher. That's the sort of power profile of player that you need in the front row these days. Like, it's not enough anymore for me to be a really good scrummager or really good at your line-out throwing. You have to have that top-end athletic output. Like, you look at Ronan Kelleher right now, great player, right? But you look at his darts at line-out time, sometimes they're a bit iffy. But you'd live with that. You'd live with the odd line-out going astray because of the power he gives you over the course of 50, 60 minutes. Like, Leinster left him on the field for 70 minutes against Munster because of the power output he gives them. This is a collective thing. It's not just about individuals. It's a collective. The power output as a group that you can project as a front five. And the front five isn't necessarily 1 to 5 in the pack. It's the guys who are your heavy, big ball carriers. How are they able to project themselves? That is a big factor in how games are won these days. Just look at all the teams who have won trophies. Like, there's plenty. Like, I think you could look at Munster and go, yeah, look, they could certainly go wide, complete barbarian ball if they wanted. But would they be any closer to winning trophies? No, not for me. Again, look at Bristol at the weekend. They're one of the most expansive teams going in Europe. Who do they have at 6? Chris Vui, the second row. Like, you look at who Johan van Graan has signed ahead of next season. Jason Jenkins getting scourged up and down the place over it. But when you look at who he's losing next year, Billy Holland, CJ Stander, there's not going to be outside signings in the front row. That isn't happening. Like, the IRFU, they need players developed, Irish qualified in those positions. So you bring in a guy like Jason Jenkins, who's essentially going to play in the back row. People thinking, well, he's a second row. It doesn't matter. He's there to play as a power forward to increase Munster's size profile, their power output, to improve the output of the other players around him. Like, the signing, when you look at it like that, makes complete sense.
Yeah, if you look at, okay, so look at Klein, Sneeman, Coombs, Jenkins. Now we've got 4 of that front 8 who are, of the kind of size and bulk that, will start to change things, or you'd imagine would start to change things. Mm-hmm. Peter O'Mahony isn't going anywhere next year, and throw him into that mix as well. Then you look at, it still doesn't solve our front row problems, Tom. And if you look at Solenoa, if you look at
Keenan Knox,
we're going to have to see, and it's not that they haven't been producing, but they're going to have to step up in a big way. And I mean, look, even if they do, that's 2 front rows. You look at the, like you said, the splits on the bench with 6-2 being the predominant way that the substitutions are broken down these days, and you're probably looking at changing an entire front row during the match. You know, during every game. So it's not just these 2 guys, but it's like, okay, they will eventually be working towards being our starting part of the starting front row, but Christ, these guys aren't going to play 80 minutes. So
no, they need to have Gavin Coombs-like seasons next year, I feel, or close to it. And you're also looking at Josh Wycherley on the other side. You're also looking at James French, who I think is a big prospect at Munster Rugby as well. A guy who hasn't played a whole lot of A rugby since he's been in the academy, yet still finds himself with a senior contract next year because of the size and power that he has.
Yeah, they have to see potential in him to be given senior contract in that direction.
There's not a whole load of contracts going on at the moment. Like, it's a tough time for contracts. There's cuts everywhere. So they obviously rate him and they rate what he brings. He's a big young fella. Like, so you look at that and you go, okay, then you're looking at a guy like Scott Buckley, the young hooker in second year of the academy. They won't be expecting too much out of him next year, but he will get minutes and allow him to develop from there. But this is like what we're talking about. Like, you look at the size that Munster can play with. You know, if you go with an RG Snyman and Tyke Byrne, we'll say in the second row, you've got John Klein on the bench then. You play Jason Jenkins in the back row. That way you can rotate your guys then around so that, you know, you've got that ball carrying power across a number of phases. So it's easier to attack when you have those defenders committed. This is still a collision sport. I know everybody likes to think it's an evasion sport and all those other things. Look, I'm sure it is in some lower levels, and you see some teams who've played lovely rugby, like Japan, for example, who everybody was talking about. Oh my God, they're brilliant. They beat Ireland, they beat Scotland. And what happened in the quarterfinal? They got beaten up by the Springboks. They got mauled from the Springbok 22 to their own 5-meter line and conceded a try. They were beaten out the gate.
Yeah.
And you look at another team who's playing with that Japanese style way and approach to playing the game. Everybody knows them. Italy. They've been trying to play that type of game, and they haven't won a game in the Six Nations God only knows how many years. They've been trying to play that way since around 2014, 2015. Yeah. And this is what happens when the power comes on. So look, for Munster, I think this whole idea of blaming Johan van Graan and getting him out the gate, look, people are going to call for what they're going to call for. They're completely entitled to their opinion. For me,
I think as well, a lot of the time, give it 24 hours when you've had a calm down, a cool down, and a chance to think about it. And I think that initial disappointment, you know, we're all Munster fans. We all love to see them do well. But that initial disappointment at the final whistle, I think, is somewhat tempered by 24 hours of realism and a night's sleep when you kind of wake back up and go, you know, look, fuck it. It is what it is. We're going to have to just, you know, go again and see where it takes us next year.
That's it. And one of the things is like, it will be important for the likes of Knox and Salanoa and Wycherley and French to stay fit and to get those reps in training. And once they get their opportunities, and they will get those opportunities, to take them and then to keep taking them. If those guys can develop, and a lot will be expected of them, but Keenan Knox will be in the second year of his senior contract next year, as Gavin Coombs was this season. Roman Salanoa will be in his second year as well. There will be a bit of conditioning work that'll have to be done with both of them. As in, you just assume that'll be the case. But those are the type of guys who have shown, Keenan Knox in particular, and Roman Salanoa this season, like the bits we've seen of him has been hugely impressive. Those type of guys coming in, like, I think, like, and everybody goes, oh, look, oh, Munster, how close are they? And you see, oh, well, maybe next year. It's one of those things. It's a bit like the way Liverpool were before they actually went and won trophies again, you know? It's one of those things that, like, everybody seems to have the opinion that Munster are degrading. And you look at the out in the round of 16 and losing in a final this year to Leinster. Until the basic physics of what we're trying to do change, then the results will stay the same. Like, I think a lot of the stuff I'm seeing at the moment about, like, you know, what people were expecting from Munster from an attacking perspective, it negates the reality of the game, like, and the reality of the teams who have consistently won trophies over the last number of years. I mean, like, show me a team who is playing like non-stop the way Bristol Rugby play, right? Show me a team like that who is winning the big games, big knockout games against big physical teams. Like, Bristol tried to match that power against Bordeaux yesterday, and they still had trouble physically. You know, Saracens showed the template for how to win at the top end of Europe over the last number of years. That is the template. And your attacking structures that you build off the back of that are once you have parity. Once you have that parity, you can play. But when it comes to playing around a power disadvantage, you end up having to do a lot of kicking. And people hate that. So it's like it comes down to, like, you hear all these nebulous terms like, oh, it's offload. Look, offloading on its own is not an attacking strategy. Okay? It's something that you do in a system that is functioning. If you don't have the power advantage in it, you're always going to be having a puncher's chance in games, because that's just how this game works. I think we've seen it over the years. Look at Munster when we were winning Heineken Cups. Look at the front five. Look at the pack. Questions kind of answer themselves from there.
Yeah, and I suppose with regards to that, are there more questions over Munster than answers this season, Tom? Or how far along the line in that have we come? What questions have we answered from last season, and what questions are there for next season? Or does it just all simply boil down to the same thing again? Power and increasing our power game, and increasing our options with regards to that power game and how we implement it, especially with regards to substitutions, depth, and when we hit the final 60 minutes of games.
Yeah, look, increasing the forward options is a must-have. In the front row, that's a must-have. Getting RG Snyman fit is a must-have. We answered one question this season, as in, what would ever happen if we ended up losing CJ Stander? Gavin Coombs answered all those questions on Saturday with one of the best performances I've seen from a young Munster player in a number of years. He was absolutely outstanding. You look at his 2 tries, put a bit of gloss on the scoreline at the end, to be fair. But you look at his first try, standing over a ball from 5 meters out, a team the size of Toulouse looking at him, waiting for him to do what he did. And then
that was old school, but I loved it, Tom. It was brilliant.
Love that. Yeah. His attitude, his approach to the game, fantastic player. Absolutely outstanding. Yeah. And he's a guy who people were saying wasn't being used properly last year. This year he comes in looking as physically ready as any young fella at 22, 23 years of age. Absolutely outstanding performance in this game. And he's a guy who I think has performed pretty well. Like, I will say, Craig Casey should have probably played a little bit more of that game on Saturday. And he's a guy who I think will become more and more important as we build going forward. Like, you look at different bits and pieces about, replacing a character like CJ Stander. That's something that is outside of my remit. I can only go on what I see in the field and trends that I see in the field. But, like, you look at all the stuff that you hear about, about Munster's identity, which is another question that's been brought up. Identity in rugby is about winning rugby games. When you're losing rugby games, people question your identity, because the only identity that people actually recognize is winning. And that is the one truism that I will say about this game, is that you look at what is Munster's identity, which always comes up when Munster haven't won a trophy. Like, when you win a trophy, your identity is the trophy. Your identity is winning games, and whatever way you do it becomes your identity. So Munster for years were the team who beat teams up, beat them into submission up front, and then won. And they did that for a number of years and won trophies. Like, because believe me, before 2006. Munster were kind of good, but they were starting to be looked at a little bit like Claremont. Would they ever win? They've got to finals and they've lost over and over again. That question was being asked. If you remember this yourself. And you look at that and go, okay, well, how do they change that? They change that by winning. So when it comes to the identity side of things as well, look, whatever way Munster can get themselves winning on the field will become the identity. And that's something that I think you hear a lot of nonsense spoken around that. And it comes down to, if you win rugby games, that'll be your identity. It's about Munster getting and building on the good performances we've seen this year. I mean, look, you look at their performance in the Pro 14 regular season, it's good. We know that even if we're not completely dominating teams in the Pro 14 from a forward perspective, which I don't think we did this year, we still had the game to beat almost all of them. But you look at, if we get that extra little juice, that extra pop in the forwards, that extra bit of overall power, all of a sudden I think you'll see Munster putting scores on teams next year in the Pro 16. Because again, you look at the way Leinster have done it. Like, it's not Leinstertainment. That's one of the biggest myths going. They beat teams into submission. You look at their pack, they beat teams up. They beat them up in the maul. They beat them up physically. That's one of the biggest things Leinster do. And it's one of the biggest things in the rise of Leinster, has been the core of young forwards that they have brought through over, well, from around 2014 on, with the rise of Tyke Furlong, then Andrew Porter, James Ryan, and all those lads. Cian Healy coming back to full fitness was a big thing for them too. like that kind of thing, finding Dan Levy, that all added to them being a huge, huge team. And they're still doing it. Like you look at them, the Pro 14 this season, last season, they were beating teams into submission.
And I see some people, some of the reaction on social media, Tom, where people are saying, we should stop comparing ourselves to Leinster. And, I can understand stop comparing yourselves to them, but they are ultimately they're the team that we have to chase for the competition that we have the most likelihood of winning. So it's very hard not to compare yourselves to them because we, judging on the stats and the records alone, Munster are the second best team in the Pro 14.
Yep.
To not compare yourself to Leinster is pointless because that's the gap that you're trying to close. If you beat Leinster, I put it, if Munster beat Leinster, they win a Pro 14. They stop that rot of not having won a trophy in over 10 years. So it's very hard to tell people not to compare themselves to Leinster when that's the Leinster is the quickest route by which Munster can get to a trophy.
Yeah, look, are Leinster and Munster rivals right now? No, they're not. they're geographical rivals, sure. Yeah. But until Munster start beating Leinster regularly, look, I think Leinster know what they need to do against Munster for the most part because the physics of the game are still the physics of the game. You look at any time that Leinster have decided to play, have played Munster recently, you look at where they've stacked their guys when they brought back test guys, when they brought back Andrew Porter, when they brought back Cian Healy. Will Connors, for example, is another guy who's really helped them in that tight power, defensively speaking, at least anyway. And that's been a huge factor. Like, you look at how many times Andrew Porter has played 70 minutes against Munster over the last number of years when he's been the guy who's been selected to play. Like, that is a huge factor, especially with rotated teams. And even go back to January, it was a big factor, that power differential. So, look, I think you look at Leinster, they're the best team in Ireland right now, for sure. They're going to be chasing hard after European Cup this year. They have a tough game coming up this weekend now without James Ryan, without Will Connors, without Caelan Doris. They'll be big losses for them, but they're going away to Exeter, another team who are very, very strong in the front five. So look at this game at the weekend now. This will be a good example as to how front fives and forward power and platform dominance allows you to be in the position to win a game. So this should be quite tight. I think Exeter might actually have the power advantage over the course of the full 80 minutes. So we'll see how Leinster react to that. But I wouldn't say there's a massive differential there. But again, it's the principles of the game as it's currently played in 2021. It's just one of those things where you can not like it. You can try and play around it through a good kicking game, through living with a team at the breakdown, rather than impacting them, man on man in defense. You can take them on the floor, but you need referees' interpretations for that. We got none against Leinster, so it looked pretty poor. We got a fair few against Toulouse. All of a sudden, looked a fair bit better. It's one of those things. I think Munster are relatively close, but they need to find 2, maybe 3 of those front 5 forwards, young players who were there. They need them to have big seasons over the course of the Rainbow Cup coming up, and then heading into that new Pro 16 season against the South African teams who, let's just put it this way, they're not sharp when it comes to the power count themselves. So that's going to be an interesting way to see how the season develops, but we'll get a look at the principles of play as to how rugby is played in the Pro 16 at the high levels. We'll see it over the course of the next year or so at least.
Okay, the autopsy came in at 33 minutes and 37 seconds, so I'm going to end the autopsy there. You mentioned the Rainbow Cup, and before we go, a chance, I saw some of the narrative over the weekend to blood some of the younger Munster players. I don't think so, Tom. I think we got to try and win a trophy. I think we have to have a cut at it. If that means blooding some younger players or giving some guys game time, fair enough. But, like I at this stage, I don't care what it is we win. I want to see a Munster captain lift a trophy. And I think, and people say, sure, look, it's just a made-up Mickey Mouse trophy. It's look at the quality of the teams coming up. Yeah. Tell me that the South African teams coming up here who are going to be preparing for possibly and hopefully the Lions tour and trying to get their house in order for that they're not going to be coming up here with every intention of having a serious cut off this and to try and get minutes on the clock before the Lions tour. These guys are coming up here with serious intent. I don't view it as a Mickey Mouse training exercise. And if you look to these teams are going to be playing in this competition in the future. Yeah, so I think let's have a go and let's see how we get on.
The Bulls are not coming up here to the Pro 16 to play around.
And they're not coming up for the weather either.
No, they're not coming for the weather. You look at the Sharks, how well they've done. The Stormers are in a bit of trouble at the moment, but they still got a whole lot of talent coming through there too. Lions as well. Look, the Bulls are coming up here to win. They will be thinking that they can beat up any of the teams up here. And when they bring them down to Pretoria, that they can do the exact same there. Whether or not the actual international section of the Rainbow Cup goes ahead, we don't know yet for sure. COVID will say a lot about that, but hopefully with a fair wind, it will. So you look at that and you go, okay, Munster will certainly need to develop certain players. But if you've got a guy like RG Snyman coming back to full fitness, and I reckon he's fairly close, then you'll see him playing. And you'll see some young lads playing alongside him as well. Munster will put out pretty strong teams, I would say. They won't be throwing out a team full of academy guys or whatever else. They certainly won't be doing that. You can't do that if you end up playing the likes of the Bulls. It would just be irresponsible. They're coming up here to, I've been watching Super Rugby Unlocked over the last number of weeks on, the videos that I gotten of the tournament last year. We don't know what we're getting into here with these lads. I think Munster actually, strangely enough, might be better positioned than a lot of teams to deal with it in the Pro 16. But the Bulls, the Sharks, they are huge. The power that these guys are going to bring. A lot of teams are not prepared for it. You look at the power differential that Sale showed against the Scarlets at the weekend. That Racing showed against Edinburgh. The teams that we're going to be playing with now going forward are not any smaller than Racing or Sale. They have huge, incredibly powerful players there. The Bulls in particular are going to be an absolute nightmare this year, in the coming seasons. And it'll be one of those things where the principles of the game will be displayed on a very regular basis, where you will have to be living with a team for 80 minutes, or you will have to have an incredibly complex way to play around them that maybe doesn't stack up week to week. Maybe you lose 6 out of 10. Look, it's going to be very exciting. But I think if Munster have an opportunity to win a trophy this year with the Rainbow Cup, they're going to try out guys like Knox, Salanoa, Wycherley, if they're all fit, I assume. But if they can get themselves into a position to win a trophy, all more power to them.
Speaking of guys who got themselves into position, Raff de Klerk managed to get himself into a position to nearly get beheaded by Jake Ball at the weekend. Tom, can you make head nor tail of this decision, or this decision not to look at it, or it's just, it is, I just think it is the most ridiculous. I mean, the referees, whatever he has, I'm sure he's mic'd up, or his earpiece should be hopping. It should be ringing from the TMO wanting to have a look at that again. And I mean, it's not like you didn't get multiple replays to it's not like one that you could say, okay, when you look back at it in slow motion, this was ridiculous.
Oh yeah, look, a desperate decision, really. Like a guy like Raff de Klerk, we want skilled players like that in the game. I think some people, even in that game earlier on, they were saying that, oh, look, a scrum half can get stuck in forwards. Now there's nothing that they can do to him. Well, Jake Ball tried. As clear a red card as you'll ever see, really. It's not the kind of stuff you even want to see in the game, really. Look, I have no problem with fellas putting shots on guys. Great, but the way that he went after him there could have ended his season. You look at the way his leg buckled underneath him. We don't want to see that in the game. It's a physical game for sure. We want guys to have those physical confrontations. But that kind of stuff that's the kind of dog shot we don't necessarily want to see. There's there's a number of breakdown entries we've seen over the last couple of months where technically just off, a little bit over the edge. That was gone well beyond the edge. Couldn't even see the edge anymore. Not what we want to see. And a player like Raff de Klerk, great young player, well, not even a young player, but a great player. We want to see those guys playing. We don't want to see them on the treatment table for 8 or 9 months. So that's the kind of stuff we want to see out of the game. I'd be incredibly surprised if he's not cited and banned for quite a long time after that. But I think he's heading away anyway. I think is he retiring? But either way, anyway, it's he shouldn't be playing again for a while once that gets looked at in a citing panel.
And perhaps maybe an eye test for the TMO as well wouldn't go astray. Tom, tell us about Three Red Kings. I'm sure if people want to go on and any of the any of the masochists who still want to go on and figure out how our last 2 weeks have come to a crushing end. But please tell me there are some brighter, more forward-looking pieces on the page.
They are, yeah. Look, I'll be looking at, I'll be going over the anatomy of the season, which is my yearly article that I do, looking back over the course of Munster season, seeing different areas where we have improved, areas where we have not, areas that need to be developed, obviously. And I'll be just looking as well at the Women's Six Nations. I'll be covering Ireland over the course of the next few weeks while we wait for the Rainbow Cup to get started back off again. I'm also going to be doing profiles of some younger players that are coming up too, as well as a few surprises that are coming up as well. So that's on patreon.com/3redkings for just €2 a month.
Thanks for joining us, Tom.
Preview.